The room didn't freeze all at once. It went quiet in sections, the way ice cracks across a lake in January, one fracture racing to the next until the whole surface held its breath, conversations snuffing out, laughter dying mid-syllable, until the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York contained nothing but the distant tinkle of a string quartet and the stunned collective exhale of 300 people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Camille Poulin was still on her knees. The shards of the champagne flute lay scattered across the marble around her, catching the chandelier light like broken teeth. The cold of the floor had seeped through the thin fabric of her black uniform trousers. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, she told herself, but from the adrenaline of trying very hard not to say something that would get her fired. Then she heard the footsteps. Not the frantic clip of the event manager rushing over, not the sharp clicking heels of the woman who had done this to her. These were different, measured, unhurried. The kind of footsteps that moved through a room as though the room had been built specifically to accommodate them. They stopped directly in front of her, and the night became something else entirely. 3 hours earlier, Camille had been standing in the staff staging area on the second floor of the hotel, wrestling with the collar button of her catering uniform and running a mental list. Roan's physio appointment was Thursday, 180 for 45 minutes, twice a week, because the waitlist for publicly funded physiotherapy in Ontario was 14 months long, and her brother's knee wouldn't survive 14 months of waiting. The agency paid $22 an hour for events like this one, double time after 10. She needed this shift. She needed to be invisible, professional, and gone by midnight. She did not need complications. The Toronto General Hospital Foundation Charity Gala was one of the circuit's better events. Organized, decent food, the kind of donors who tipped well because they felt vaguely guilty about how much the wine cost. Camille had worked it 3 years running. She knew the room, knew the flow, knew which board members liked the smoked salmon blini and which ones wanted the vegetarian skewers kept within arm's reach. Poulin. The event manager, a tightly wound man named Phil, who sweated through his collar by the first hour of every shift, appeared at her elbow. Room 4 is backing up. Get the sparkling water circuit running and then loop back to the North Bar. Already on it, Camille said. She tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, picked up her tray, and walked out into the ballroom. The Fairmont's main hall was exactly what it always was, a cathedral built to money. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. Walls the color of old ivory. Men in tuxedos that cost more than her monthly rent standing in careful clusters, nursing aged scotch and performing their own importance. Women in gowns talking about Muskoka and private school waitlists and the renovation on their annex properties. Camille moved through it the way she always did, efficiently, without friction. A ghost in black and white, tray-level, eyes forward, present enough to do her job and invisible enough that no one felt the need to acknowledge she was a person. It was a skill. She'd built it carefully over years out of necessity. She was making her third pass along the north wall when she heard the laugh. She would not have recognized it anywhere else, but her body recognized it, a specific, high-pitched sound, too sharp for the room, too deliberate to be genuine. Her grip tightened fractionally on the tray. She allowed herself one glance. Sybil Aldgate was standing near the ice sculpture installation at the far end of the room, holding a champagne flute and wearing a gown the color of winter wheat. She was the wife of Dr. Graham Aldgate, Chief of Cardiology at Toronto General, which meant she was, in the particular ecosystem of this gala, royalty. She had the kind of blonde that didn't come from a bottle so much as from centuries of very specific genetic choices. She'd graduated from the same private girls' school that Camille had attended on a bursary, which was how Camille knew exactly what that laugh meant. She'd heard it in the hallway outside chemistry class when her second-hand blazer had a loose button. She'd heard it at the winter formal when she'd arrived alone. She'd spent 4 years trying to stay below the radius of that laugh. It hadn't always worked. Keep moving, Camille told herself. North Bar, water circuit, midnight. She pivoted toward the service corridor. Oh, for goodness sake. Sybil's voice, warm and carrying, the kind trained to fill a room without appearing to try. Camille, is it? From St. Margaret's. Camille stopped. She turned around, because not turning around would have been worse. Sybil was walking toward her with the easy authority of a woman who had never in her life been told that her presence was inconvenient. Her husband Graham stood a few feet back, talking to someone else, half paying attention. I thought so. Sybil's eyes moved down the length of Camille's uniform with the specific calibrated interest of someone taking inventory. You're catering now? I'd heard you were in some kind of logistics. Medical supply, Camille said. She was proud of that. I pick up agency shifts. You pick up shifts. Sybil repeated it as though Camille had said something mildly exotic. She turned slightly toward the man beside her, older, silver-haired, wearing the expression of someone who'd been brought to this event as a prop and was beginning to resent it. No shame in honest work. I think it's wonderful, really, that you're managing. She smiled at Camille, warm and entirely poisonous. You always were resourceful. The word resourceful landed the way it was meant to. Camille said nothing. She had run the calculation on moments like this many times over the years. The cost of saying what she was thinking versus the cost of staying quiet. She smiled, very slightly, and moved to step around Sybil. Sybil shifted. Just enough. I was going to grab another glass. Sybil gestured toward Camille's tray. You don't mind? Camille held the tray level, reached out, her fingers, perfectly manicured, a deep wine red wrapped around the stem of a flute. The glass didn't fall by accident. Camille knew the difference between an accident and a decision, the slight pause before the release. The way Sybil's elbow moved outward rather than inward, the flute hit the marble edge of the nearest cocktail table and shattered with a flat, unglamorous crack that was somehow louder than it should have been. Cold champagne spread across Camille's wrist, across the tray, across the floor in a wide arc. One piece of the broken stem rolled to a stop against the toe of Camille's black work shoe. Oh no, Sybil said. Her hand flew to her chest in practiced horror. I hope none of that got on anyone important. It hadn't. It had gotten on Camille. That had been the entire point. The conversations nearest to them had already started to die. Heads were turning, the slow, predatory rotation of bored, wealthy people orienting toward friction. Phil materialized from Camille's left. He took in the scene with the speed of a man whose entire professional identity depended on keeping wealthy people comfortable. His eyes moved from the shattered glass to Sybil Aldgate to Camille, and completed a calculation that Camille had already run herself and already knew the result of. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Aldgate, Phil said. Poulin, get that cleaned up, right now. I'll get someone from maintenance. I said right now. His voice dropped to a hiss beneath the ambient noise. Dr. Aldgate's table is 12 feet away. Don't make a thing of this. Sybil watched the exchange with the patient satisfaction of someone watching a proof resolve correctly. She reached for a fresh glass from a passing tray, entirely unbothered. Though I have to say, Sybil said, addressing Phil rather than Camille, as though Camille were a piece of furniture under discussion rather than a person standing in front of her. Someone who can't manage a tray without causing a scene is probably not a good fit for an event of this caliber. She dropped it on purpose, Camille said. Quietly, but clearly. Sybil blinked. The smile remained, but something behind her eyes went very still. I beg your pardon. The glass. Camille held Sybil's gaze directly. You dropped it deliberately. I watched you. The silence that followed was absolute. Sybil's expression didn't crumple. It refined itself. The warmth fell away like a coat being shrugged off, leaving something older and considerably less decorative underneath. Phil, Sybil said, still looking at Camille, I'd like this handled properly, unless you'd prefer I mention it to the Foundation Board Chair. Table 7, I believe. Phil made his decision in under 2 seconds. Poulin. He leaned in close, voice barely above a murmur. You get down there and you clean up that glass right now, or I call the agency tonight and you never work another event in this city. Do you understand me? Camille looked at him. She thought about Roan, about Thursday, about $180 and the wait list and the way her brother had looked last week when she'd told him everything was fine, she had it handled, he didn't need to worry. She lowered herself to her knees. The marble was cold. The champagne had spread across the floor in a thin, glittering puddle. She reached for the largest piece of the broken flute. There we go, Sybil said, her voice returning to its social register, addressing the small audience that had gathered the way she always addressed audiences, performing at them rather than for them. That's exactly right. Some of us are here to donate to this hospital. Some of us are here to clean up the mess. There's no shame in knowing which one you are. She paused, tilting her head slightly, letting the room hear every word clearly. You always were just the help, Camille. You were the help at St. Margaret's and you're the help now. Some things don't change. Camille's fingers closed around the largest piece of glass. The edge bit into her palm. She stared at the floor. She waited for the shame to arrive and swallow her the way it used to, back when she was 17 and wearing a blazer with a loose button. It didn't come. She was too tired for shame. There was only the cold marble and the shattered glass and the sound of Sybil Aldgate's certainty filling the room like smoke. She reached for the second piece. Leave it. 2 words. Low, carrying no particular volume, but hitting every corner of the room as though the acoustics had been rearranged specifically for them. Everything stopped. Camille did not look up immediately. She was focused on keeping her breathing even, on not making any expression at all. The footsteps she'd been hearing for the past 30 seconds stopped directly in front of her. She raised her head. Cohen Hartley was crouching on the marble in front of her, his dark suit jacket pulling taut across his shoulders, his forearms resting on his knees. He was at her exact eye level, looking at her the way a person looks at someone they have been trying to find. He looked exactly as she remembered, though lacking the grey pallor and the labored breathing and the fact that he'd been dying on parking lot asphalt the last time she'd seen him. "Miss Poulin," he said. "Just for her." Camille's brain, which had been running on pure functional adrenaline for the past 5 minutes, stuttered completely. "Put the glass down," he said. "I'll lose my contract with the agency." "Put it down." She let the shard fall. It clinked against the marble. Cohen stood, and he brought her with him. One hand wrapped around hers, steady and completely unhurried, as though this were the logical next step and not the most disorienting thing that had happened to her in years. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. He held her hand and turned it over carefully. He examined the shallow cut along the edge of her palm where the glass had caught her. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Then he raised her hand. Deliberately, in full view of every person in the room. He pressed his mouth to her bruised, work-roughened knuckles. The sound that moved through the ballroom was not dramatic. It was the sound of 300 people simultaneously losing their understanding of the evening's social hierarchy. He held the position for a moment. The warmth of his mouth was startling against her cold skin. When he straightened, he turned his gaze to Sybil Aldgate. He said nothing. He simply looked at her with the complete calm absence of any recognition that she was someone who required his acknowledgement. The way you look at a name you can't quite place, mildly puzzled, already moving on. Sybil had gone the color of old bone. Cohen's eyes moved to Phil. Phil flinched as though he'd been physically struck. "Her contract ends tonight," Cohen said pleasantly. "If you'd like to discuss Hartley Group's event arrangements going forward, my office will reach out." Phil disappeared into the crowd. Cohen looked back at Camille. The controlled, measured quality behind his grey eyes shifted. Something considerably less composed moved through it. "Come with me," he said. Outside, the November air off Lake Ontario hit her like a held breath finally released. Sharp, smelling of lake water and exhaust and the particular cold that settles into downtown Toronto in autumn when summer has stopped apologizing for leaving. In the car, the silence between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was honest, which Camille found she preferred. She broke it first, because she had always been better at uncomfortable truths than at uncomfortable waiting. "You fired my event manager and walked me out of a gala where Sybil Aldgate is going to spend the next 3 days making very specific phone calls." Her voice was steady. "I needed that shift. My brother's physiotherapy is $180 a session and I do not have a backup plan." Cohen turned from the window. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I've been looking for you for 9 months," he said. "I know about the agency contract. I know about your brother's accident last February. I know about the Scarborough apartment and the gap on private physio coverage, and the fact that you've been working 2 jobs since March." The silence changed texture entirely. "That is," Camille started, "that's genuinely alarming." "I know that too." He held her gaze without apology. "Let me explain the context before you ask me to get out of my own car." She waited. "9 months ago," Cohen said, "you saved my life in the parking lot of a medical supply warehouse in Etobicoke. I'd had an anaphylactic reaction at a dinner 2 blocks away. My driver had gone for the car. I made it outside, and then I didn't make it any further." Camille remembered. The loading dock. The end of a 12-hour shift. A man on the asphalt between the parked lorries, airways closing, making a sound she had heard once before and hoped never to hear again. She'd run back inside for the kit she'd stocked herself, including the EpiPen she carried, because her brother's physiotherapist had mentioned outdoor allergen risks, and she had taken that suggestion about 15 steps further than anyone expected her to. "Your airway was compromised," she said. "You administered epinephrine and kept me positioned correctly until the paramedics arrived," he said. "You told me to focus on your voice and count backward from 50. I made it to 31. You were conscious for most of it. For all of it." His voice was quiet. "You were gone before the medics finished their report. One of your first aid certification cards had fallen from your jacket. It took 4 months to trace it back to you. Camille looked at her hands. The cut had nearly stopped bleeding. You should donate it to a hospital charity, she said, in my name. Something. I tried to find you to ask what you actually needed. A pause. What do you actually need? To not be someone's good deed, she said immediately. I've spent my entire life being the recipient of other people's charity. I don't want your money. I'm not offering money. She looked up. I'm offering a conversation, he said. One I've been trying to arrange through professional channels for months. His suite at the Fairmont was spare and without excess. Clean lines, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling glass with a view of the lake and the city lights, strung along the waterfront like a second horizon. He produced a first aid kit. She let him clean the cut on her palm because arguing would have cost energy she didn't have, and because she was curious what a man like this looked like when he was trying very hard to be careful with something fragile. He was very careful. The warehouse, Camille said, watching his hands. Where I found you. I'd done an informal supply audit there 3 months before. They had 4 expired EpiPens in the emergency kit, and the rest of the inventory was misfiled. I told the shift manager. He said it was fine. Cohen's hands went still. I restocked it myself, she continued, on my own time, because it made me angry that nobody else had. Why? He asked. Because my brother almost died on the 401 in February, waiting for someone who knew what they were doing. He was knocked off his bike. Conscious for 12 minutes before help arrived. Nobody touched him because they didn't know how. She held Cohen's gaze. I took every first aid course available in the GTA after that. I got the EpiPen because I wasn't going to be the person who panicked. He looked at her for a long moment. You've been carrying that kit everywhere since February. It's not heroic, she said. It's practical. Most people don't do the practical thing, he said. Most people do whatever makes them most comfortable. He set the bandage in place and didn't immediately release her hand. Tell me why you were documenting the supply discrepancies. She blinked. At the warehouse, you said the kit was misfiled, the inventory in the wrong order. Were you contracted to audit it? No, she said slowly. I kept noticing things. At loading docks, at event staging areas. Product arriving 3 weeks late because of a routing error nobody had flagged. Cold chain documentation that was technically compliant but practically useless because the timestamps weren't localized. I started writing them down. You wrote them down. I have a notebook. She stopped. An actual physical notebook. 2 years of observations on logistics inefficiencies in the medical supply chain between Etobicoke and the downtown hospital corridor. Because I can't stop seeing the cracks and I can't stop being angry about them. And writing them down is the only thing that helps. Cohen Hartley went very still. Can I see it? He asked. She went back to Scarborough for the notebook. She wasn't entirely sure what impulse made her return. Something about the quality of his attention. The way he asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. The way he'd said, "Can I see?" instead of "Bring it." They sat at the table by the lake window until 2 in the morning. It was not the conversation she had expected. He asked and she answered, and when she walked him through the cold chain timestamp issue, he pulled up 3 months of unresolved delivery complaints on his laptop, and she saw immediately where the fracture was and told him precisely. He looked at her the way people sometimes looked at X-rays, when something finally became visible that had always been there. Hartley Medical Group's community clinic supply chain is hemorrhaging money through routing problems. I cannot get my internal team to prioritize, he said. They look at it from the top down. You've been looking at it from the inside. I've been living inside it, she said. I want to offer you a position. He held her gaze. Not from obligation. If you say no tonight, I will handle what happened at the gala through other channels, and you will not hear from me again unless you choose it. But I think you're the person who can actually fix this, and I'm not willing to miss the chance to ask. Camille looked at her notebook on the table between them. 2 years of observations she'd been keeping because she couldn't stop seeing the damage and couldn't stop being angry about it and had no other outlet for either. Community supply chain analyst, she said. Director, he said. Real authority, real budget. You'd be building it from the ground, but... I know where the ground is, she said. I've been standing on it. The lake was a dark mirror outside the window. The city hummed below, indifferent and continuous. Roan's physio, she said. Your benefits package covers it from week 1. She let out a slow breath. I won't be grateful in ways that compromise my professional judgment, she said. I'd be disappointed if you were. And if I find something wrong in your own chain, I'll tell you directly. I'm counting on it." Camille looked at the notebook, then at Cohen Hartley, who was watching her with the patient stillness she now recognized as his particular way of holding his breath. "Then we have more work to do tonight," she said, and pulled the notebook back toward her. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York was exactly as it always was. Chandeliers, string quartet, the soft percussion of old money and new ambition moving in careful orbits around another foundation gala. The same event, the same room, the same architecture of who stood where and why. Camille Poulin walked through the main doors in a dress the color of deep water, understated, exactly fitted, chosen because it suited her rather than because it performed anything. And the room began to do the thing rooms had started doing when she entered them. It noticed. She was not carrying a tray, she was not in uniform. She wore the lanyard of the Hartley Medical Group's Community Partnership Initiative, and she was listed in the evening's program as Director of Community Supply Chain, and 2 Foundation board members had contacted her office that week specifically about the satellite clinic pilot she'd proposed. Cohen walked beside her. His hand rested at the small of her back, a gesture that was both entirely professional and entirely not, and that she had decided she was comfortable with precisely because she had decided, not because anyone had arranged it for her. "Board chair is at table 4, he said quietly. "I know. Thursday meeting is confirmed. The routing pilot is ready." She surveyed the room. "I need 20 minutes and a whiteboard." "You'll have both." She moved the way she always moved, efficiently without friction. But the friction that had once been manufactured by other people's contempt was simply gone. Men who had looked through her nodded. Women who had performed superiority at events like this made careful, correct eye contact. Near the ice sculpture at the far end of the room, Sybil Aldgate stood in pale green, holding a champagne flute with both hands. Word had reached her, word had reached everyone, that Dr. Aldgate's department contract renewal with Hartley Group had processed without complication, which meant the conversation she'd had with her husband the morning after the November gala had not produced the leverage she'd intended. Sybil saw Camille. Camille looked at her. Not with anger, not with the particular sharp satisfaction she had imagined on certain hard early mornings she might feel in exactly this moment. She looked at Sybil Aldgate the way you look at something that has simply become irrelevant to the actual work, with the mild, distracted detachment of a person who has too much to do to spend any of it on this. Sybil looked away first. Camille turned back to the room, her room now, in all the ways that mattered, and went to find table 4. Behind her, the string quartet played on, and the city outside the tall windows held its cold November light off the surface of the lake, indifferent to who was invisible and who was not, keeping its own quiet accounting of everything.